All right. Are we ready for episode 1 of our podcast?
We are.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we can just get right started, I think.
Yes. Welcome to the Let Us Hear Your Roar podcast.
No, Let Us Hear Your Roar is cringy. We are not naming the podcast. I refuse.
Is it lettuce like the plant or is it let us?
That lettuce like the plant would be funnier. I might be okay with that, but I'm not. That's
We'll
not
have
the
to
name of the
take it back
podcast.
to the focus groups and see what they say.
Anyway, while the focus
Who,
groups
Josh?
are focusing,
Josh and Nathan.
oh my word, we are the 3 authors of Lion's debut novels for our first launch, and we wanted to get together and just chat about ourselves, how we got into writing the books that we're releasing, a little bit about our author journeys, and we'll just see where it takes us. So let's head on in. So I'll start by introducing myself. My name's Rebekah. The book I'm writing is called Oops, I Made an Apocalypse, which I think is a great name. And the synopsis of my story, spoiler mostly free, is that I almost called her a young woman, but I'm not a young woman and she's my age. So a woman in her mid-30s is running a TTRPG campaign for family and friends and takes them through this like horrific kind of thing. And the story begins with the last like moments of their campaign ending, and they kill the bad guy, but most of them are dead, and it's all intense. And she finishes the campaign and feels very confident that it was a good, harrowing tale. And then the next day she wakes up and she is living in that world and has to find her way out as she realizes that the apocalypse she created in her campaign comes to life. So it is going to be a LitRPG, although it's going to be a LitRPG that's less like, if those of you that read, I don't know if you guys have ever read a LitRPG, but for readers of those, it's not going to be like an AI or a computer where you've got like a HUD kind of display and see all these things. It's more like a piece of paper that like updates with magic. So it's kind of a fantasy LitRPG kind of vibe. It's going to be a standalone novel with some humor. So some of the ones that I've thought about comparing it to are like Dungeon Crawler Carl. I mean, nobody is Matt Dinneman. But that's definitely a comp title for me. And I also read All the Dust That Falls, which is a LitRPG about a robot vacuum cleaner that I feel like has a sort of similar vibe to what I'm doing. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. And humor-wise, it's not there's no romantasy element to this particular story, but assistant to the villain vibe-wise, like with some of the humor and stuff, is more the way I write.
I can go next.
Let's go. Okay, who are you?
Okay, my name is Seth Cordle.
Oh my gosh, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. My book is called The Heroes of High Nora. It is book 1 in the Bone Merchant saga. The synopsis at its most bare bones, it is the daughter of a chief, desperate to save her people, hires a group of thieves mistaken as heroes.
That's beautiful. He's worked on that.
That is my official synopsis
That's
of the book.
really good. No, I really like that.
That is what I've written. So comp titles, the character-wise and the interaction between the characters, it's pretty similar to Last Airbender.
Okay.
But much more adult.
It is an epic fantasy. This is not like a
yeah. It's world spanning and it's elemental magic, so it is very similar. It's a group of, they're not kids, but they're young adults equivalent to typically late teens, early 20s, but they're like elves and dwarves in there, so some of them, the ages are weird. Another comp title I would say is Gentleman Bastard Sequence, which is just a group of thieves. It is not in the humor style. It's definitely not as vulgar as those books, but they are incredible books and everyone should read them. As far as flashbacks go, it's pretty similar to Stormlight Archive in that every character gets a flashback book, and it kind of interrupts the story to give you a little bit of flashback. I'd say those 3 are probably the most similar things I have.
Fun. I like it. All right. Author number 3. What's your name? We'll start there.
My name, Henry Hall. I am the 3rd writer on this debut campaign for Lion Publishing.
We're all equal here, just so you know. You're the 3rd to introduce
Chronologically,
yourself,
he was also 3rd to have his book put into the thing.
He was, but he was
true.
the first to have a completed book.
That's true.
That is
So
also
in many ways,
true.
you're first.
And that way, Rebekah is definitely 3rd.
Don't say that.
As long as you have it done In the next 15 years, you're doing better than George R.R. Martin.
You know
Or
what?
Patrick
That's my
Rothfuss.
goal is
Yeah.
to beat George R.R. Martin and Patrick Rothfuss and getting
That
their
is the
books out.
lowest
So-
bar I've ever seen a writer have.
Well, my bar will be higher.
Set realistic goals.
Yeah. So what is your book and what is it about?
So my book, what I thought might be the finalized title until I talked to you guys today, I was referring to it as Blood and Bullets.
And we may keep that.
The idea is for it to be the first in a trilogy. It's set in the 1800s. It's set in the Old West. It's a little bit of a mix of our world and a fantasy world, because the entire time I was writing it, I was trying to decide if it was set in our world or if it was a fantasy world. And what it sort of massaged itself into is alt history, I guess you could say, with some fantasy elements in it.
It's hard because your book classifies as a Western alt history, kind of magical realism. Like it doesn't fit perfectly into a genre, which is what we've talked about with a lot of our books is I want to like test some stuff and say, hey, can you actually sell books that don't fit neatly into those things?
And the basic plot is it follows a teenage boy named Lind, short for Lindsay, living in this small remote town in the American Old West. And one day his life is thrown upside down when this lone gunslinger comes to his town, and demons also arrive too. And what you learn is this gunslinger is divinely appointed by God to go around exorcising demons using guns rather than exorcism. And so it's basically
Seems thorough.
Yeah, he's basically an exterminator for demons, I guess you could say, going around.
They are divinely touched guns.
Yeah, he's got
They're
guns.
not just regular guns, like demons.
So it's like
probably-
The Exorcist meets Ghostbusters.
It's like The Exorcist. He's not. I use the term exterminator. It's not like a Ghostbusters or something. It's like The Exorcist meets like The Dark Tower, I guess you could say. Stephen King's Gunslinger. Very much an inspiration. I was reading that series as I was writing this, and that's what gave me the idea for Gunslingers to begin with.
It was really interesting, though. I obviously don't want to give spoilers because I really
That's
like the
the
way
hard
the
part,
story
yeah.
unfolds. Do you have any comp titles other than that one Stephen King book you were reading?
I very much structured the trilogy in my head based on JoJo's Bizarre Adventures plot structure, which each season of that follows a different protagonist, which that not without going into spoilers, like the idea was sort of like every book in this trilogy is going to focus on a different character. And specifically something in JoJo that inspired me is the first protagonist of the series is very much portrayed as a moral paragon. He's doesn't really have flaws. Like he's a very flat two-dimensional character, and the author even acknowledged this in interviews where he said the reason he did that is because he wanted all the protagonists after this first one to sort of like be someone you're comparing in your head to that protagonist, like the ways that they are flawed and the ways that they fall short. You've got that perfect standard that you're judging them against, and that was a big influence in the way I wrote the gunslinger character who meets Lens.
So I have been thinking a lot about main character writing, and I read something recently that was talking about one of the reasons that like literature has become boring and entertainment in a lot of ways feel boring. It uses like D&D as an example, which all of us have played D&D and other TTRPGs, where it used to be that D&D you start with like a character who is basically a nothing. They have a little bit of experience and maybe a little bit of armor, and then they go through things, and those things are what the story you tell is about and like what makes them develop as a person. Versus in like modern D&D, when you play, you kind of start out with a character who already has like a fleshed out backstory and very clear motivations, and like they may grow during the campaign, but honestly, I feel like a lot of D&D games end up feeling like your character has already grown or developed a lot before you start, and then they just start trying to figure out how to get through this process. But I don't want to do that as much in books because I like the idea of a character, like the book being about the character's actual like development in that. And so there's definitely some foils to my main character, to my personal life. And so I thought about like, I know that a lot of people are like, you know, they end up writing themselves as characters. And so I'm doing it semi-intentionally. But one of the reasons is because I want to kind of pull out some flaws that I see in myself and like put them on the main character as things that will be affected, like those things will have to grow and be shifted like during the course of the story. And so she's almost, I wouldn't say the opposite, but she's not the moral paragon. She's like basically thinks that what she's doing is right, and then like finds out like the parts of her that were actually wildly more shallow than she could have predicted, and like the ways that she grows and realizes. It's funny because I would say not to use like too modern like of a term, but my main character literally has main character syndrome. And like part of what she discovers through the course of it is like, just like running a game as a DM, like that she did prior to the story beginning, she actually will be the most successful if she chooses not to be the center of attention, not to be the one who's actually making stuff happen, but rather be there for the people that are doing that.
Yeah. One thing in modern storytelling that's a struggle for people is that your character doesn't have to be dynamic to be interesting. And so having like the character you were just saying, like having a character that's not supposed to grow, and like my main character's like right-hand man, best friend is that like he's supposed to be the same character from book 1 till, if he lasts until book 9, until that point.
Yeah.
And like
a good
but
way.
It's good to have both types of characters in a story.
You're just talking about a static character, which is not a bad thing.
And a good way I heard someone put it once is I think they were talking about the Star Wars sequel trilogy and like all the flaws and all the horrific, awful decisions they made with those movies. But they were talking about how a lot of the people who were involved in making that trilogy talked about like the reason they made Luke such a flawed character in there, where he like tried to kill his nephew in his sleep and ran off and tried to kill himself on an island and ended up actually killing himself. I hate those movies, but they were talking about how like we did this with Luke because we need to show that characters can still be flawed even as adults. And it's like, it's like this idea of like, we need to knock Luke Skywalker down so that we can build him back up to what he was at the end of the original trilogy. And it's like, I was listening to some movie reviewers and podcasters talk about it, and they were talking about like that idea of static characters. And the way they put it was I thought a very tactful way of putting it. It's not just a matter of them being static characters. It's like there are some characters who just like the growth that you see, the growth that you experience throughout your life has already happened for them. Like you hit a certain age, and it's not like you're ever going to stop growing as a person. But once you've hit a certain age, it's like most of the growing you would do as a person has already happened. So you've sort of like, you've already settled into who you're going to be.
Yeah.
It's funny enough too that like they struggle to figure out what to do with Luke in the sequel trilogies, and Yoda in the original trilogy was right there.
Yeah,
he was
was right there.
That too, yeah. But like trainers, like you don't want your trainer to be someone that has to be knocked down. It can be an interesting thing, but to feel like you need to do that and change a character's 30 years of character development just doesn't make sense. Yeah. But that kind of gets us into the next question here, which I actually didn't put on the list, but like the process of writing these books. And for me, having a story that was current story along with flashbacks makes it really difficult because they both have to have their own beginning, middle, and end, at least fulfill some kind of structure. But I have to have some kind of reveal at the end of the flashbacks that changes the way you view the current story without it being spoiled in the current story. And it's a very difficult thing to balance. And so I ran into that same problem. Like in the flashbacks, I have to have Gavin grow, but then I also have to leave enough room for him to grow in the current story and then grow through 8 more books. And it's got to be, and that's where epic fantasy is nice, because it can be these little incremental things, little by little. I think
you can also use that to reflect the way that people grow more in real life.
Yeah.
Because like the reality is, like you said, it's like there's a certain point at which as an adult, it is unlikely, unless you experience some great trauma or like a massive change in your life, there's a point at which the growth that you have is no longer these like massive, huge things. It's just incremental. And before you're 21, every time you grow, it's like these huge sweeping changes, which I think is why like YA can be such an interesting like thing in genre, because you're getting to reflect like these real life, like huge sweeping things. I actually have flashbacks in my book as well, not at the beginning of every chapter. My flashbacks though aren't really telling like a story that's related to what's happening in the present. Mine are there to explain some of the pre-apocalyptic and post-apocalyptic things that were occurring like in the story in such a way that kind of explains the internal monologue of the main character. But the process of writing this book has been really, like, it's been harder for me than I wanted it to be. I had never planned on being a published author. Like when you and I were first talking about your books, I genuinely was like, I had this vision for starting the publishing house and why we wanted to do this and writing books that get back to the art of storytelling and not essentially critical race theory determining what makes a good story, but sitting down to write, I'm finding my stride in it, which has been such a weird process because it's just not something I ever expected to do. So like, how did you write your book? Like, what was this? I've been around for a lot more of his
because you said it's been years, right?
Yeah, you wrote this 5 years ago.
Yeah, I started writing it before quarantine, and then I abandoned it, I think, because it just seemed like a pipe dream that anything I wrote would ever get published. Sure. And then at the encouragement of a very dear friend of mine and a mentor, Thomas Cook, who you both know, I finished it during quarantine. So I probably started like upwards of 7 years ago or something like that.
That's wild.
Yeah, I know. It's why you've asked me questions about it, like before the podcast, before we started recording. You've asked me questions before about it or about something you read. I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
I don't remember. I think some of the edits I did on the book while you were asking me to add some content to it, I ended up taking out and rewriting a lot of stuff in some of the other chapters too that you didn't ask me to, because I was reading it and I was like, this is cringe.
Yeah, we hadn't even gotten to the developmental edit at that point. So it was good to be able to let you self-edit and do a whole round of that, which is, again, such an interesting thing getting into like the publishing process, because we're not just like self-published authors. We're trying to do this as an established like trad publishing thing, which I'm very excited about and happy about. But are you guys outliners? What do you call it? Pantsing?
Pantsing.
Yeah.
I'm becoming one because
a pantser or an outliner?
Outliner.
Okay.
I don't know what you mean by pantsing, Seth.
It's the opposite of outlining. It's just, I don't know where this is going to go. I'm just going to start typing and see what happens.
So that's what I did with this book that we're publishing from me right now. And going back, I talked to Rebekah about this the first time we met about you publishing it, was that I hate pre-writing. I hate redrafting, which is such an ironic thing for me to say. Every writer I've ever listened to says redrafting is so important. I just hate it. Once it's on the page, I don't want it have to go back and change it.
Yeah, I get that.
I want to go back and tweak stuff. Like there have been a number of times I've gone back and found like details, like small details of what I was writing that like I've changed or I've changed my mind on, so I have to edit those. But I don't ever want to go back and just like gut an entire section and just rewrite it.
Seth, are you an outliner or a pantser?
So I think for me, the larger scale it gets, the more outlining it gets, and it shortens down.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So like for the outlining of of all 9 books, I have those completely mapped out. Books 2 and 3 are still a little iffy, but books 4 through 9, like completely mapped out. And then when I get to like outlining a book, each chapter is lined up. But then once I get to writing the chapters and I'm like, here's point A, here's point B, let's figure out how we get there. And then sometimes the characters go on tangents and I'm like, well, I got to add another plot. So I'm going to go back and add more chapters.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's definitely an element of pantsing to it. But so my first book, at first I was like, well, I want to have this trilogy of young adult books about my main character. But then I realized like this story is not interesting enough to be its own story. But I'm really excited about the first book of the next series that would be When Everyone Meets. And it's like, why don't I just write that? And then I threw the flashbacks in there. And then it slowly became this new thing that is now a book I'm extremely proud of. But when I like look at the book, when I sit down to write it for book 1, it took me 3.5 years, and I wanted everything to be perfect on the first draft. And I was like, I don't want to rewrite it because I'm so in love with how it's written. And I'm like 3/4 of the way done with book 2 now, and I got I just had the flashbacks right, but I got the whole current story done during NaNoWriMo. And it is not good. And so I'm going to go back, and the second edit is going to it's only like 50,000. Like it's not even close to what the genre would expect from a sequel of a 146,000 book.
That's wild. I actually started out totally pantsing it, like not outlining anything, because I just was like, I had the idea. But what I ended up coming to with that book was like, instead of outlining chapter by chapter, I came up with like the way I want the story beats to work, like where I want the rises and falls to be, and like all of those kinds of things. And so I have like 6 elements of the story that I'm trying to say, let's hit this, let's hit this, let's hit that. I will say I do appreciate that all 3 of us have, we've written books that are completely different from one another, but all kind of fit into the same like speculative fiction genre, like in a broad way. I kind of love that. Also, I like that we're all interested in different things because I think that it makes our potential catalog of books better because it's not just all epic fantasy, but I think it'll give us the opportunity to say we have the stuff that's like more lighthearted and ridiculous. Shifting gears back into the writing process and authorial things. I finally felt like I got to a point where I really saw this is where the climax of the story makes sense. This is like where it hits. And so did you have a point in writing when it just clicked for you?
I actually can't think of a moment. Like maybe I didn't feel like everything clicked, but there's a twist involving a character. That twist came to my head. And I was like, that gets me to exactly where I need to be for the end of the story to happen. Yeah. And I feel like it's a better explanation for why this character is behaving this way than what I originally had. In the ending I was working toward, it all clicked at that one moment where I realized, like, I'm going to take this character and work this twist in for the end of the book. And I feel like a lot more has clicked now that I've started. I want to say I'm 15-ish pages into the second book in the trilogy. I feel like a lot has clicked. We're talking about Star Wars, and the first Star Wars movie was written by George Lucas because George Lucas wanted to he just wanted to tell a story about teenage farm boy leaving his home, going and saving a princess. He was very much inspired by the teachings of Joseph Campbell, who was, I don't know if you guys know who that is. Yeah, the guy who's like studies myths and was like, wrote about how all of our myths that have survived the test of time all tell like the same overarching narrative about like the hero going out and all that. And George Lucas wanted to like take that format that Joseph Campbell had found and just tell a movie that I adapted that story format beat for beat. So like Star Wars was written out of a desire for George Lucas to just tell a story about a boy going on an adventure. There wasn't much more beyond that. Like it was Empire Strikes Back in the twist of Darth Vader being Luke's father, which introduced all the underlying themes that end up becoming so, what's the word I'm looking for? Foundational to that trilogy of redemption and like temptation, like overcoming temptation, like for Luke standing up against the temptations of what is essentially space Satan in Emperor Palpatine and Darth Vader redeeming himself and sort of coming back to the light even after he thinks there's no hope for him anymore. Like Star Wars becomes a lot deeper in Empire Strikes Back because George Lucas, having told that initial just adventure story, started coming up with ideas for themes and messages that he actually wanted to communicate, which is what stories are ultimately meant to do. They're supposed to communicate lessons and ideas and things that you strive to. And I feel like that's what's happening with this trilogy I'm writing. Like that first book was born out of me. I just wanted to write a story. For as long as I can remember, I've wanted to be a writer in some form. So I wrote this book very much out of, I just want to write an adventure story. I wanted to show these characters going on this journey and experiencing these hardships. And I feel like with the second book, I've made this comparison to you before. I very much feel like this second book is Empire Strikes Back. I'm not going to say qualitatively it's that good because I'm not going to make that assessment of my own work. But in terms of just, I have a lot of things with this second book that I've realized I really want to say. There are lots of themes in this, and there are lots of messages that I want to communicate about the characters, Lind and all the other characters that are going to be returning from the first book and the new characters I'm introducing.
I think, honestly, what I experienced in it was, for me, a reminder of what a hero's kind of origin story can look like, unexpectedly being thrust into something that is so overwhelming and so harrowing, and it like pulls out this version of that person that like otherwise wouldn't have happened. We've had so many conversations, you and I have had conversations about why we hate modern storytelling and a lot of things, especially film. I think it's more obvious a lot of times, but like, it's so hard for me to buy a book that's been released in the last 10 years. And I think that it's a really interesting conversation to come back to, like, why is that? Like, why are we even writing these books in the first place? Why are we doing a Kickstarter and launching a publishing house? Like, there's lots of publishing presses and all sorts of people doing stuff. But I do think that it's a relevant thing to say that, like, for me, I would say, I don't know that I have a moment that my story clicked perfectly. Like I said, it was more like just in conversations with my co-author, Nathan, and going through what that would look like. But I think that for me, it was more about like, what's the point of this publishing house? What's the point of our catalog of books? What's the point of the stories that we're trying to tell? And you're the first person, I think, who reminded me of like how to say what we're doing. I don't want to say it in a negative way. I don't want to be like, we're writing stories that are not this or not that. Because I think the first thing people go to is like, not woke, that's like the kind of vibe. And I'm like, but I want to define myself by something that I don't actually enjoy, like reading. I don't want to define myself by how much I'm not like that. I want to define what we're doing in the affirmative. And you were the one that was like, it's just a return to actual like good storytelling. Yeah. And I've been like pondering a lot about, and I don't know, we weren't planning to go here, but I just feel like it's a natural
I think it's a
outflow.
great transition into the Kickstarter.
Yeah, I think it's a natural outflow of that. And what I've been thinking about is how so much of modern storytelling, and I would say not all of it, like I'm going to give credit where credit's due. There are a lot of books that I really like that I think say a lot. And honestly, a lot of books that I love that even would say a lot that you could interpret as opposed to my personal political stances or whatever, that I can still enjoy and find a lot of value in. But I do think that I've been realizing even in the last few weeks has just been that I feel very exhausted by the influence of like critical race theory specifically on storytelling, because it transitioned us from this idea of storytelling is about interesting stories, and they don't have to be heroic stories. They can be funny, they can be horror, they can end badly. It's not like the stories themselves are only like one formula, but critical race theory's impact, it focuses more on like, okay, well, who is writing the story and how oppressed are they, and who is the main character and how and why are they oppressed and in what ways, and that is the driver of everything. But unfortunately, that's not a story. That's maybe a hook, but it's not actually a story yet. And so I like the idea of like going back to storytelling, because we're not just like, I'm just going to say this in like as clear a way as I can say it. We're not just writing stories about like white men who save women. Like, it's not like we're just like, you know what I mean? We're not doing some non-woke formula of, but I think that we're just writing interesting stories.
Because the response to this influx of wokeness is going the complete opposite, which that's what we see a lot of media doing now. A lot of the media that they know people just don't want to see that. So like, let me give you the most like conservative story I can give you. And it's like, what if like we could take both of those things and remove the forced politics? Like, politics should be in stories. I'm not saying it shouldn't ever happen, but to remove the forced politics, they're like, let me make sure that this is an allegory for today's political
a book released in 2026 doesn't need to just be a commentary on what you think of Donald Trump, whether that's positive or negative, just because it's 2026. You know?
It's what you said. I appreciate you saying it about my book, because it's not that my book is not about anything. Obviously, I wouldn't say that. I didn't.
Hopefully not.
Just sitting in a chair eating saltines. It's the whole book.
But my point being, I started out just wanting to tell a story, not really having anything specifically like deeper messaging I wanted out of that. But as you pointed out, like, there are obviously messages that end up in there, like main character Lynn, like how he's affected not only by the evil that he experiences at the hands of like demonic forces, but also by the good he experiences from this very great man who comes into his life and in many ways becomes a mentor figure to him in the midst of all the evil he's experiencing. You can't help but end up putting deeper themes in there, even if you don't necessarily realize it.
I think that it is important that when you give people the opportunity to see parts of themselves or something that they relate to in a book, that it's more about character and drive and dreams and like who you are as a human being. And it's a lot less about like, does their skin look like mine? Does their hair look like mine? Does their clothing look like mine? Because like, I don't have a problem with people writing anything that's influenced by their own culture or any of those things. I've read some really amazing stuff that was clearly inspired by not like American culture. And I think that's beautiful, whether or not it's contemporary or fantasy or whatever.
It's like me looking at Aragorn and saying, he's not bald, so I can't be Aragorn.
And like, that's the problem with a lot of writing today, is it's like, we want to take our world and implant it into this. So it's like, we want all of our same racial hangups. We want all of our same gender inequality stuff. We want all of that in this world because we want to tell you about how much we are unhappy with our world by portraying it in this other world. And it's like, that's fundamentally not what stories have ever been about. Like, you go back to the oldest stories, like the Epic of Gilgamesh or Beowulf. Like, Beowulf was basically the thing that inspired everything Tolkien ever wrote. He taught entire courses as a professor about Beowulf and how important that was to like storytelling and how foundational that was as a myth. It's like the story of Beowulf is just, it's this dude going to a foreign country and saving them from this demonic monster that's been killing them over, like, their people over and over again. And he's like, I'll go kill it for you. It's aspirational.
Yeah.
And stories don't always have to be aspirational. Like, I'm obviously not talking about some rule that you have to follow. Like, one that immediately comes to my mind is Jeff Goldblum's The Fly. There's nothing like inspiring about that, but David Cronenberg, that's who made that movie. He said the entire movie of The Fly is a metaphor for getting like Alzheimer's or growing old, like your body betraying you and how you just can't get out of that. And so, like, there's not like, it's possible for really good stories to reflect our world.
Sure.
But people take it in the wrong way. Like, I can't imagine like a version of the Fly that's like about like racism or about gender inequality or something like that, because like, I don't even know how you tell that story. The point of the story as it's told is it's like this fly monster science fiction movie is a metaphor for like getting Alzheimer's or for like getting some other horrible disease that's incurable. It's like, I don't even know how you make that political. That's not a political story. That's just a story about like tragedies that anyone can experience.
Also an issue with like a lot of books written from this, like, again, I'm just going to use the term critical race theory because it explains what I'm talking about. Books written from that perspective also come from this place of like, there is one way to think, there is one right, there is one thing that is like the thing. Like, it's, you have to believe this is good and this is good and that is bad and that is bad, and there's no other way to like critically actually consider the world around it.
It's like the prioritization isn't on storytelling at that point.
Yeah.
Kind of switching gears to a different question, but something that this reminds me of. And Seth, you haven't got to talk about your book in a little bit, so I think this is a good one for you to start with. What is a character in your story? Maybe it was your favorite one, or maybe it's a character like that you see yourself in, or someone that you were just like really excited to tell, like to tell their story.
That's where I think my book's beginnings is interesting because it's based on my first Dungeons & Dragons campaign.
Hey!
And so the main character of Gavin Grimscar IV was my very first Dungeons & Dragons character.
I love that.
So he already has a very special place in my heart.
How funny is it that two of these books are literally based on D&D campaigns?
Like actual campaigns, yeah.
I love that.
So I don't think Gavin is the one I would, like, he's not the most fun to write. For this first book, Henrietta was by far the most fun character to write, which is his mentor in the flashbacks. She is an old woman who is completely insane. And it makes it so, well, she's the only one he's met with his powers. So it's it's so fun to write that. And then I'd say Groove is my second favorite character, right? My actual favorite character of the whole book is not going to show up until book 5. So it's going to be a minute on him, but I'm really excited for that character. I have his whole story planned out.
Yeah, I guess one of the more enjoyable ones, the gunslinger, I haven't named him in this episode yet. The gunslinger's name is Kenny, who Lynn meets. There were lots of things involving Kenny that were fun to write because he's very much sort of almost a knight in shining armor type, and so there are certain aspects of that are fun. And Lind, on the other hand, is he's orphaned. He's raised by an adoptive family, but he was orphaned very young, and I was a teenager, so he's very moody. He's very, which you don't need to, you don't need to orphan a teenager to make him moody, to be fair, but he's also got that going on. But so like the contrast of like Kenny being almost obnoxiously positive and like and just like impossible to get him down, impossible to get him upset, like in battle, like if he's defending someone, but like it's impossible to sort of offend him in conversation. Like you can try and he's just going to let it roll off his back. There were aspects of like that dynamic between the two that are fun to write. Just the frustration Lind has that he just can't make Kenny not happy. So there's lots of things I have planned for Lind that I also think will continue to put him up there as one of my favorite characters to write.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a question that's popped in my head. In a novel, if you break it down, and this is, comment if you think this is absolutely ridiculous, but in my estimation, there are basically 3 elements that come together. You've got the plot, you have the characters, and then you have the world building. And it's the foundation is basically the world building and then the plot and characters are added, but every story has like more or less of some of them. So there's obviously some books are very driven by characters, some are very driven by plot, some are very driven by the type of world that's there and the characters and plot feel more tangential. So as an author, what is your favorite of those three things to create?
Oh, hands down characters for me. We talked about outlining and pantsing earlier, but I outline the characters and I pants the world building. Like as the characters did thing, I was like, I guess this is what happens in the world.
Yeah.
And it led to, there's right at the end of Act 1, Thea's character encounters something that I kind of made up on the spot. And I was like, I really like this. It's really original. No other world I've ever read has been like this. Mm-hmm. And so I build characters and then I give them a plot and then the world just kind of happens.
It's definitely not world building. I haven't even fully figured the world building out for my book yet.
Listen.
And it's finished.
Yeah, it's like, oh man.
I don't need to, luckily, because this book, the setting of this book is very isolated.
Sure. Mm-hmm. That was one thing, just to interrupt you, that was one thing reading it that was so interesting to be really drawn in. I'm not a big world building person either, which we'll talk about in a second, but I remember thinking the setting for this is so sparse and isolated, but somehow it just worked so well for the characters and the plot that you created that it felt natural and I didn't want more. Like I didn't need more at that point. Good. So it was good. Like it worked really well.
But between characters and plot, it's hard to choose because they're kind of, in many ways, they're really inseparably linked.
Sure.
Like your characters, either your plot will drive your characters or your characters will create the plot.
Yeah.
So they're kind of really linked to each other. But between the two, it depends on the day. There's never a day where it's world building. Mm-hmm. I'll say that.
That's hilarious. Yeah. Like I said, I'm not a big world building like person. Although I think the one that's inspired by this D&D campaign, I have already done so much of the world building because I'm the DM of the campaign that we're literally doing. Like you're one of my players. And so because of that, I already have so much of the world building. Now I'm adjusting it dramatically to fit in the book. So I think I had done so much of that I was less interested, but the one where I'm getting to do some like quantum physics stuff and all that, it's been kind of fun just like on the very initial parts of it, discovering how to do that. And I found out I have a friend that we actually go to church with, all of us, well, sort of you, that we go to church with that has some background in quantum physics. And so I'm like excited to interview them and kind of figure out how this could work in the magic system. And so I have actually had more fun than I expected. I guess world building wise, maybe I'm talking myself out of my answer because world building wise too, for my book, one of the biggest things has been, it was originally going to be written as a TTRPG using D&D, like, because the D&D campaign is what it was inspired by. And then when we had this idea to create our own TTRPG, Nathaniel's basically helped me go through and like create like skills and stats and like combat mechanics and all of these other things that, because it's a lit RPG, I have to have as we go into it. And
there's so many copyright issues you'd have to deal with D&D.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Cause you can use the base system, but it's a mess, but it's been fun to work with Nathan on a lot of that. But I would say at the end of the day, I'm a plot person. I will read a book where the characters are razor thin if it has a really fast paced, fun plot. I loved reading The Housemaid. I know that like Frida McFadden can be like controversial in terms of some of her books are kind of icky. Or like there's some question if she like used AI to write, but like I read The Housemaid after seeing the movie with you and your wife. Like we went to see it with several of us. You hated that book.
It was horrible.
You hated it. And why did you hate it?
Because there were no characters in it and everyone was awful.
And I didn't care. It was just a thriller. I needed
AI
a thriller.
would have done a better job.
I needed a story that was just ridiculous and would like keep me on the edge of my seat. And I could have cared less about how much I liked the characters. And it's funny because I think for me, even in writing, obviously I'm trying to flesh out who my characters are. I'm not just creating all flat static characters, but I really enjoy the process of just figuring out like what kind of a plot would keep me interested. And I mean, that's part of why like Dungeon Crawler Carl is one of my favorite series. They have incredibly deep characterization that gets built. A lot of it's kind of ludicrous. It's not as serious, obviously, but I love the whole concept of just like, in the first couple pages, like every building in the world is flattened. So if you were inside of a building, you immediately were killed. And then if you were outside, you see a portal that goes down into a dungeon.
People who are intense.
They actually answer that question.
Oh, do they?
Yeah.
Okay.
So The point is, I love that
What about
because
mobile homes?
the mobile homes were considered structures. So
Oh, really?
Yes.
They answered that too.
yes,
Oh,
flat. So
Look how big those books are. They answered the questions that you're.
every autistic
And there are 3 more
question I
coming.
could ask.
it is honestly, I think if you read them, you will be surprised how into detail he gets about some of those things because it is really funny, like so interesting. But like those books, I love because of the plot. I like the characters obviously a whole lot. I think they're really well done. But for me, it was more like the craziness of what was actually happening was so much more interesting to me than how the characters developed.
I have one more question
Go
before
for
we
it,
close out on the
please.
Kickstarter stuff.
Those aren't real
because
people.
no book is completely original, right? And we talk
Totally.
about comp titles. So I'm not asking about comp titles, but what inspired you to write your book? What are some stories, whether it's books, movies, whatever, or authors themselves or other books?
Yeah.
What characters, what people in real life, like what inspired it?
Okay. I have lots of answers to this, so I'll try to like rapid fire through a lot of it. So
I have a lot of answers. I cannot rapid fire. I'm just going to go
that's
long.
okay, Henry. You're more artistic than me. It's okay. It's a spectrum. I grew up reading a lot. So the first thing I ever read a lot of was The Babysitter's Club. So I did start off on contemporary middle grade fiction about babysitters.
It was contemporary at the time.
It was contemporary at the time. But I think what really inspired my love for reading and like the sci-fi kind of speculative fiction genres, those types of things, I started reading the Animorphs series and I was obsessed with it. I was in like 5th or 6th grade when I started reading them. And I'm collecting them because they're not for sale anymore. You have to buy them used anyway. I'm collecting them in person as I find them. And there are these stories about these like middle schoolers who got a power from an alien to turn into animals. And then they had to stop the big bad evil guy by using their special
Visor 3.
Yep, Visor 3.
That's his name.
And-
I remember. I read
Yes.
I was obsessed with those in middle school.
I love it.
No, not middle school. Elementary school. I started reading those young.
You are younger than I am.
Yeah, I read them in elementary school too.
Yeah.
Visor
They came
3.
out, they were new when I was in like 5th grade.
Yeah.
But I
Also-
loved those.
Also, no reason for me to say this, but I remember their alien friend, Aximile Escaroth is still.
I could not have told you his name. I just know they call him Max. That's
remember-
hilarious.
She read them last year.
I
No.
read them in 2025.
I have not looked. Your copies over there is the first time I've seen a copy of Animorphs in probably 20 years.
That's amazing.
But I've got like the name of their alien and the villain tattooed on my
That's
brain.
so funny.
Because of how obsessed I was.
Yeah, they were like, for whatever reason.
My favorite character, Tobias, stuck as a hawk.
Dude, Tobias is also not only one of my favorite characters, that is one of my favorite boy names. So if
It's
and when
a
I
cool
have
name.
I'm gonna picture it's the same Tobias from Arrested Development.
No, don't do that.
I was about
my-
to quote him, and nothing he said was appropriate enough for me to say on this
Oh my
podcast.
god,
Well,
that's awful.
I love that series. I own it all on Kindle, and I read it all at the beginning of last year. I was like,
I've never read the full series because I just read.
I did never read the end because I got to the end that like when I was reading the series like all back to back, and I have chronologically exactly.
I
do you know how it
definitely didn't
ends?
I think
No
I read
spoilers
last-
on the
Spoil it, but do you
podcast.
remember?
One of them dies.
It was
right?
more. All I will say.
Actually, question: one of them dies, right?
You guys have to talk about
Remember-
that off the podcast.
Right.
You're about to
no, it's fine.
spoil it.
But my whole point, it ends a lot more like epic than I had remembered because I don't know if I just hadn't read all of them. Anyway, so back to the question of inspiration. That was like the first series that really sparked a love for reading. And then I got into Harry Potter when I was honestly like in 8th or 9th grade. I was a little bit older. I didn't read it as
Is that
like
when
a
they were
kid
first coming out?
No.
Oh.
I got into them when the 3rd movie was being released. So I don't know what year that
Okay.
was. But I got into Harry Potter and all of a sudden was like, oh my gosh,
Harry
this is
Potter.
amazing. Like, and I was so in. I mean, I just came back from Universal.
My
and-
mom read me those books when I
mean-
was a kid.
But I would say like those two things were like big inspirations for my love of like reading and eventually like wanting to get into writing and creating. But I would say like a bigger inspiration has been running D&D campaigns. Like
Yeah.
not necessarily like an author or even like a movie or any of those kinds of things. Like Dungeon Crawler Carl was a big inspiration in terms of writing a lit RPG, like specifically, but running these campaigns, the campaign we're doing it was like the original inspiration for the book. And then I've rewritten the entire plot. So it's no longer even close to the plot of the campaign.
Yeah.
But I'm running the Vecna Eve of Ruin campaign for you and 4 other guys.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
and Dungeons and Dragons makes sense because you are telling part of a story with other people.
Yeah.
Like it's literally you getting your own hand at writing a story, at least writing a character in a story
Yeah.
if you're a player.
Well, do you
are.
remember session 16?
Yes.
That was what inspired me to write this book. We literally,
which is the name of the imprint for LitRPGs.
Yeah, we're like using that for the publishing house, but like it was session 16 that just so you know, that is not in any way in the Vecna campaign. Like it's not written in the Vecna campaign. It was a fully, completely unique side quest that I wrote. And like by the end of that session, like one of the characters basically changed his allegiance. He was like he was going to be evil and betray everyone. And he was like, I can't do this now because of what happened to this character. And it was so crazy. Like,
everyone's crying by the end of that session.
It was the best session of D&D I've ever been in. And it inspired me to write this book. So that's definitely, the biggest one.
Henry.
What inspired you as a kid? What made you love all of this?
So it's funny. My inspirations, if I go all the way back to when I was a kid, it was just evidenced by me interrupting you constantly.
Like during Animorphs.
Yeah.
I love it.
Animorphs were probably...
Did you read Vegemorphs? Why does no one read Vegemorphs?
It's a parody.
It's a parody where they turn into vegetables instead of animals.
Wait, that's a thing?
That's a thing.
You made that up on the fly.
All I remember is the kid named Kale turned into Kale.
But so I think the Animorphs books might have been the first books like I read on my own after learning to read. My mom read me a lot of stuff. That was something she would do every night is she would read to me before I went to sleep. She read me all the Harry Potter books. I reread some of those on my own too. I don't think I ever finished my read through. And at this point, I'm actually on a matter of principle. I'm not rereading Harry Potter because I want to wait until I have kids because I want to read it to them the way my mom did for me.
I love that. I want to do that with my kids too.
Yeah.
I want to read it to my kids. I want them to start reading it when they turn 11. I want to wait and like
give them a book
I just
a year.
think that would be maybe for the first couple. My kids would my kids hate me? Anyway,
They'll have plenty of other media
They probably
to keep them busy.
but like I'm striking while the iron is red hot with them. Like as soon as they're old enough to understand words, it's like I'm like sit your ass down. We are reading Harry Potter. But so like Harry Potter was the next one that was super inspirational to me. Harry Potter truthfully isn't a huge inspiration in how I write now, partly because it's been so long since I reread it. Like I said, I'm saving a reread for when I have kids. But it's influential in the sense that it's one of the things that made me fall in love with storytelling. The other being, again, I keep referencing it for this reason. My dad came back from a trip with a DVD of Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope. He gives it to me. I was like, this is live action. I don't want to watch this. And he was like, trust me. And he puts it on. And I can still remember like the opening crawl when that Star Destroyer just goes across the screen. Like it's the Tantive 4 first. The Tantive 4 zooms past, then there's just the huge Star Destroyer coming like in the field. And they're like shooting each other, and it cuts the inside of the Tantive 4 and C3PO and R2D2. These robots are in there, and I'm just sitting there like, this is possible?
This is the real world.
Yeah. How did you do this?
Real.
Yeah, I was like, how did you do this? And then like,
I like that you're asking your dad this.
no,
Dad, how did you make this?
No, I wasn't asking my dad that, but I was like looking at the movie like, how was this done? And then like Luke Skywalker, like Obi-Wan gives him the lightsaber, he turns it on, and beam comes out of the saber. I'm like, what is that?
Seconds before he was looking into it.
Yeah, I know. And then it's Darth Vader and all this stuff in the Death Star. That's no moon, that's a space station. That was even more than Harry Potter. That was probably the thing where like it just opened up an entire world, literally a whole world to me of stuff that I didn't even know was possible. Like I didn't even like live action stuff. I only liked cartoons before that because I didn't think you could do something that amazing in live action. Like, and so like that like completely just turned my imagination on in a way that it just hadn't been before.
For my inspirations, one thing that is huge for me is found family. Like a lot of my favorite media, for me, it was television growing up a lot. I read a lot of books. I can't remember specifically which ones as kids, other than maybe Chronicles of Narnia, that really inspired me. But so like some of my favorite shows, Firefly is my favorite show, Last Airbender.
Firefly?
Yes, Firefly is my favorite show of all time.
That's on my list. I need to watch it.
Yeah, you definitely need to watch it. I just put my wife through it and she fell in love with it too. So yeah, Firefly, Last Airbender, Ninja Turtles is my favorite IP of all time. So found family has just always been a huge thing to me, which is probably the biggest thing about my book. But I remember when I was in high school, I read The Hobbit. And then as an adult, after D&D, I wanted to write these books, and I sat down to start writing. I was like, I've read one fantasy book in my whole life. So then I just started reading all of them, and I read Lord of the Rings, Chronicles of Narnia. My biggest like inspirations within that are pretty obvious. I got Sanderson, Weeks, Scott Lynch. Like those are some of my favorite authors ever. But my actual favorite author ever, and I don't know if I've ever even talked to you about this, outside of fantasy, is J.D. Salinger. So Catcher in the Rye, 9 stories.
Okay.
Franny and Zooey is a top 10 all-time book for me.
That is, he was all of his stuff. It's not nonfiction. What's the term for it? It's all just like Catcher in the Rye set in our world. It's
Like
very
contemporary fiction
mundane.
for the time.
Yeah, contemporary. That's the exact kind of genre and fiction I don't like.
Same,
Like,
usually.
Usually, yeah. But so J.D. Salinger's writing style, I have never seen someone be able to write 2 people sitting on a couch having a conversation and have me on the edge of my seat. So he wrote a bunch of short stories and then these 2 novellas about this family called the Glass family. And they were former child prodigies that were on this like game show. And then as they grew up, they all had horrible lives. And the oldest brother committed suicide at the end of the first short story. Like literally ends with him putting the gun to his head, pulling the trigger, and then the story ends. Wow. And so Franny and Zooey are the 2 youngest. Franny has a mental breakdown. She's schizophrenic or bipolar or something, has to leave college. So Franny is a short story about her and her boyfriend having a conversation. And then Zooey is about her and Zooey at home talking. And they're literally just talking about her having a mental breakdown. And it's just... he just takes these characters that are so flawed and they don't do anything. They just talk and you just fall in love with all of them. And I want to be able to write dialogue and characters like he did. And then he wrote one novel and then went into hiding for 50 years. And the only time people saw him was when they took pictures of him at his mailbox.
Cool. All right. Henry, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. On our first episode. I'm so excited.
Yeah.
I think this is going to be really exciting. And Seth, we've got so much to do.
We do. Henry, thank you for letting us hear your roar.
No, that's not a thing. It won't be a thing. I refuse to let it be a thing. But
That was for you, Nathan.
we just appreciate you, Henry. Shut up, Seth. All right. Peace.